Hello, this is Gunjo Carl. You should have seen my face when I saw this for the first time. Happy as a pig in muck. Look at it, it's rock solid. This is a very big rocket, and having something rock steady like this, oof, boy, that was a good development. Just so you can see, this is what should be happening. I'm sure we've all been through this one before. So this one is working through the magic of auto struts, and in this case, carefully interdigitated grandparent auto struts, and it works beautifully every time. No flaws, I guarantee it. So what's, yes, no flaws at all. I'm excited about this because while I'm holding off on the real-time Moon speedrun for another fellow who's joining in, I'm thinking about trying for the in-game time speedrun. So a clear way to push down the time of the in-game time speedrun is to push up the size of feasible rockets in KSP 1.3. I've done a lot of big rockets in the past, and this video is the tale of me trying to push up the limits of my style of big. So we saw there, oh, this can be done with regular struts as well. This is some of my work on regular struts. The auto struts happen to hold everything really, really well. The regular struts work too, but there's a little bit of bowing in here. It can be kind of hard to see from this video, but it's just enough to start to cause problems with big rockets. So moving forward with those auto struts, I decided to try to find a way to get around those staging problems. And it turns out cutting the throttle works. As I worked, I made these things bigger and bigger, and eventually they got so big that they actually overhung the runway. We're launching these things from the runway because the launch pad isn't big enough, but even the runway is not big enough sometimes. Moving right along with staging, using fleas can really help with the staging. And you can see here we got some staging going at full throttle, which is always a nice feather in the cap. And the question as good scientists is, does it work every time? Sure does. Fleas for staging large rockets tend to be a very nice way to go. So there's a few things that can really kill rockets as you scale them up. And when I'm saying scale them up, I'm referring to up to many hundreds of boosters. And one of the big ones is little rocket wiggles. We're going to see a few of them here. Take a look at the rockets on the right. Even though everything's strutted together, they're still getting their wiggle on. And they're not big wiggles. They don't shake the whole thing. But at the same time, little wiggles in one place of your rocket can actually transfer, just kind of like harmonic oscillation frequencies. It transfers across your rocket and it winds up sparking little wiggles on other parts, and sometimes they feed off of each other and the whole thing just falls apart. It can feel really random and it can feel really frustrating. They're very, very hard problems to track down. And that's actually the thing that limits the size of rockets for a lot of different styles of building. Back in the day, back in like the 0.2 era, it would limit the size of things, even down to medium-sized rockets. You'd really have to deal with the wiggles. But these days, it's only when you go very large. And so these suture-shaped struts are one of my ways of dealing with it. By placing them one at a time by hand, they're all a little bit different size, which means they all have a little bit different frequency. And so you don't really get good transfer of those shakes from one side to the other. And so this rocket is using the magical auto struts for going along lines, and then connecting those lines, connecting the stages together are these sutures. And placing them one at a time by hand does two things. One is that it helps to prevent the wiggle, and the other is that KSP still has problems getting symmetry to work right on the large scale. This here was an explosion from one of those. Sometimes you'll put a strut in, and it looks right, and it'll work right on 3 corners of your rocket, but on the 4th corner, it doesn't do. So one at a time, slow but steady, put them in by hand. I was finding that I was getting too much shear between the different stages. And so I started strutting and strutting between the stages to try to get it to work, but on my huge versions, I just never got it to happen. So I decided to change up the way I was doing things. And rather than having my stages be different sheets of these magical auto struts. I instead had the magical auto struts, I instead had the stages going widthwise. So I made these enormously wide rockets. I think they must have been like 40 engines wide or something like that. And then just had 2 or 3 sheets. You can see those 2 or 3 sheets building up there. And here, I picked the wrong time to decrease the width of my screen, but there it is. And it flies beautifully. And it turns out it stages fairly nicely too. Well, in the end, it will. So what we're going to see in just a moment here is rather than having a single lengthwise sheet fall off, instead the left and the right end of the rocket are going to zoom off. And for whatever reason, this has been working really well for me. There they go. Like magic. Kind of pretty too. So that doesn't seem realistic at all, but at the same time, it's doing the job pretty darn nice. So now we've got a big rocket going. The next trick is going to be actually tuning it for this in-game speedrun. And the idea here is that in-game time, you want to get to the moon and back as quick as possible. So you need a lot of delta V, and you need it to be at a very high TWR as well, which is kind of a fun thing to build for. As far as the final stage is concerned, I'm just kind of taking what I already have from my all-flag speedrun, which I will be finishing, by the way. Please continue to look forward for that. I'm just working on some other things first. This has an average TWR of about 2 or 3. And what is it? Somewhere in the ballpark of 14 kilometers a second. So it's a pretty darn nice little thing. It also has a secret weapon, which is in the middle there, the heat shield with the command chair on it. And that thing can be spiked down to the Kerbin's atmosphere at like 6.5 kilometers a second, which is more than enough, I should hope. So nothing to do at this point, but put it all together and see how it goes. Of course, one of the tricks about this in-game time run is that we really do need those very high TWRs in order to speed up and get there as fast as possible. Just having delta V isn't enough on its own. So we've got, right now our little Kerbal is transferring from inside the pod, which they start in, and this rocket has reached kind of its cruising speed. It got there as quick as possible at a few G, and then it's just going to stay there until it gets to the moon. Our little Kerbal has a moment they can hop out, pop into the command chair, and continue the rest of the way to the moon. Of course, when you're building a rocket this big, and it's got like, I don't know, this thing has 13 stages or something like that, there's so many little bugs to get out. And so a lot of this was kind of the story of me getting the fuels to flow correctly and all that. There's of course a million little minor optimizations to do as well, along the lines of, it's not going fast enough in this stage. Well, switch out the rockets. It doesn't have enough fuel. Add on more fuel tanks. But eventually it got there. And this is kind of the run. I would say this is the first. Oh, some more good explosions. I forgot about these. So many of these along the way. And with big rockets, it takes you 20 minutes to get to the good explosion because of all the computer lag. Well, at least they make for some pretty fireworks. Oh, you know it's coming. There it goes. So anyways, at the end of the day, I was able to get a very large rocket, which kind of did a nice little dress-up run. I didn't wind up hitting the moon, but I got out to the moon and back in a time that's about what I was hoping to see. So one of the funny parts on this trip up is in KSP 1.2 and 1.3, those tanks have so much drag, but even so, it's worth it to just burn as fast as you can up against gravity. And wouldn't you know it, it's going to make it all the way up and all the way back just in time for the record. Of course, this doesn't get it because it doesn't actually land on the moon. It doesn't actually return to Kerbin, but it's got the speed. Here's the thing, though. It's only barely got the speed. And it's going to take a lot of tries to get everything crisp and precise enough to work with just this. So I'm going to need to put some more work into getting this part here, the final stages, to be faster. And I'm going to need to put more work into getting the base rocket to be bigger still. I want to be able to get this run by a mile, so I don't have to try too many times. Speaking of a mile, missed Kerbin by a country mile on this one. You can see it sailing by down below. It goes so fast. It's hard to believe that we're going to crash into Kerbin going this speed, but that's what it's designed to do. So in the next week, I'm going to be working on trying to make a bigger rocket through using traditional struts, which are more computationally sane than the auto struts. We'll see if it does anything. All right, wish me luck. Oh, and if you got any tips for this sort of thing, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you all next week.